An excerpt from Xeno's Conscience by Italo Svevo. I remember the healthy words, but not the little face, also surely healthy, which he must have turned toward me at that moment. At that time, I didn't know whether I loved or hated cigarettes. Their taste, the condition nicotine created in me. But when I came to realize that I hated all of those, it was worse. And I had this realization at about the age of 20. Then, for some weeks, I suffered from a violent sore throat, accompanied by fever. The doctor prescribed bed rest and absolute abstention from smoking. I remember that word, absolute. It wounded me, and my fever colored it. A great void and nothing to help me resist the enormous pressure immediately produced around such a void. When the doctor left me, my mother had been dead for many years, his cigar clenched firmly between his teeth, remained a little longer to keep me company. As he went out, after gently running his hand over my blazing brow, he said, "No smoking, eh?" A huge uneasiness came over me. I thought, it's bad for me, so I will never smoke again, but first I want to have one last cigarette. I lit that cigarette and felt immediately released. Though my fever was perhaps increasing, and at every puff I felt my tonsils burning as if they had been touched by a red-hot coal, I finished the whole cigarette dutifully, as if fulfilling a vow. And still, suffering horribly, I smoked many others during my illness. My father came and went with his cigar in his mouth, saying, "Bravo! A few more days without smoking, and you'll be cured." These words alone made me yearn for him to leave, to go out at once, allowing me to rush to my cigarettes. I even pretended to fall asleep, to induce him to leave more quickly. The illness provoked the second of my troubles, the effort to rid myself of the first. In the end, my days were full of cigarettes and of resolutions to smoke no more. And to make a long story short, from time to time, my days are the same now. The whirl of last cigarettes begun at 20 continues still. My resolutions are less extreme, and my weaknesses find greater indulgence in an elderly soul. When we are old, we smile at life and everything it contains. I can say also that for some time I have been smoking many cigarettes, and they are not the last. On the flyleaf of a dictionary, I find this note of mine, recorded in an elegant, even ornate hand. Today, 2 February 1886. I am transferring from the School of Law to the Faculty of Chemistry. Last cigarette! That wasn't a very important last cigarette. I remember all of the hopes that accompanied it. I had become infuriated with canon law, which seemed to me so remote from life, and I was rushing to science, which is life itself. Perhaps condensed in a beaker. The last cigarette actually signified my desire for activity, even manual, and for serene thought, sober and solid. To escape the chain of carbon compounds in which I had no faith, I returned to the law. An error, alas, also marked by a last cigarette, which I find recorded in a book. This one was also important, and I became resigned yet again to those complications of mine, the thine and the theirs, always with the best intentions, finally throwing off the carbon chains. I had demonstrated scant inclination for chemistry, thanks in part to my lack of manual dexterity. Now that I am here, analyzing myself, I am seized by a suspicion. Did I perhaps love cigarettes so much because they enabled me to blame them for my circumstances? Who knows? If I had stopped smoking, would I have become the strong, ideal man I expected to be? Perhaps it was this suspicion that bound me to my habit, for it is comfortable to live in the belief that you are great, though your greatness is latent. I ventured this hypothesis to explain my youthful weakness, but without firm conviction. Now that I am old and no one demands anything from me, I still pass from cigarette to resolve, and from resolve to cigarette. What do those resolutions mean today? Like that old doctor described by Godini, can I expect to die healthy, having lived with illness all my life? Once, as a student, I had to have my old room re-prepared because I had covered the walls with dates. Probably I had left that room precisely because it had become the graveyard of my good intentions, and I believed it no longer possible to conceive any further such intentions in that tomb of so many old ones. I believe the taste of a cigarette is more intense when it's your last. The others, too, have a special taste of their own, but less intense. The last ones gain flavor from the feeling of victory over oneself and the hope of an intimate future of strength and health. The others have their importance because in lighting them, you are proclaiming your freedom, while the future of strength and health remains only moving off a bit. The dates on the walls of my room were written in most varied colors, even painted in oil. The resolution, reaffirmed with the most ingenuous good faith, found suitable expression in the strength of the color, which was to make the previous vow look pale. Certain dates were favorites of mine because of the harmony of the numbers. From the last century, I remember one date that I felt should be sealed forever in the coffin in which I wanted to bury my habit. 9th day of the 9th month of 1899. Significant, isn't it? The new century brought me dates of quite a different musicality. 1st day of the month of 1901. Today, I still believe that if a date could be repeated, I would be able to begin a new life. But the calendar is never lacking for dates, and with a little imagination, any one of them can be found suitable for a good resolution. I remember the following, because it seemed to contain a supreme categorical imperative for me. 3rd day of the 6th month of 1912, 2400 hours. It sounded as if each number were doubling the stakes. The year 1913 gave me a moment's pause. There was no 13 month to harmonize with the year. But you must not think so many harmonies are required for a date to lend significance to a last cigarette. Many dates that I had find written down in volumes or in favorite notebooks stand out because of their dissonance. For example, the 3rd day of the 2nd month of 1905 at 6 o'clock. It has a rhythm of its own. Each number contradicts its predecessor. Many events, indeed all, from the death of Pius IX to the birth of my son, seem to me worthy of being celebrated by the usual ironclad vow. All of my family were amazed at my memory for our anniversaries, sad and happy. They believed me so considerate. To reduce its outlandish appearance, I even tried to give a philosophical content to the last cigarette disease. Striking a beautiful aptitude, one says, "Never again!" But what becomes of that attitude if the promise is then kept? It's possible to strike the attitude only when you are obliged to renew the vow. And besides, for me, time is not that inconceivable thing that never stops. For me, and only for me, it retraces its steps.